Welcome to Black Woman Leading the podcast. I'm Laura Knight, your host and the founder of BlackWomanLeading.com. Today, we're talking about leveraging strategic self-advocacy with Sarah Boyd. Now, if you want some insight to support your visibility, even in the midst of this very disruptive workplace landscape we're in right now, if you want some tips and tools on how you can be a strategic self-advocate for yourself in the midst of everything that's happening in the political, the technological, the economic landscape that we're in right now, and if you are a leader of a team and know that you want to provide more air cover for your team, how do you make sure that they have the resources, the support, the tools that they need to do their best work? If any of that resonates with you, then you need to keep listening. Let's get into it.
Black woman leader. Black woman leader.
This podcast amplifies the needs and experiences of Black women leaders in the workplace with a holistic focus on three core areas: leadership development, mental wellness, and relationship management. Our ultimate aim is to help Black women learn, heal, and grow in their leadership capacity. Get ready, sis. The Black Woman Leading Live Conference and Retreat is back for our 4th annual event. And this year, we're leveling up. In 2026, we're developing future-ready leaders. Leaders prepared to rise, adapt, and thrive in a world that's changing every single day. Designed by Black women for Black women, this is a one-of-a-kind professional development experience. You'll go deep into the heart work and the head work, the alignment, strategy, clarity, and confidence you need to boldly walk into your next level. This year, we're spotlighting the skills and mindsets that define future-ready leadership, navigating disruption, leading through change, anticipating opportunity, and adapting with resilience and vision. Whether you're an emerging, mid-career, or senior leader, this space was created with you in mind. True to our cultural roots, we learn in community, across generations, across experiences, and across our shared brilliance. You'll be surrounded by Black women leaders, coaches, and experts, including direct learning from yours truly as the creator of the Black Woman Leading programs and podcasts. If you are ready for transformation, if you are ready to expand your leadership and your wellness, if you're ready to prepare not only for what's now, but what's next, then you belong here. Join us at Black Woman Leading Live, May 11th through the 14th in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Save your seat at www.bwlretreat.com. Your future-ready leadership journey starts today. Hey, everybody. Today we are talking about leveraging strategic self-advocacy with Sarah Boyd. Hey, Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Laura, thank you so much for having me. It's awesome to be here.
Of course, of course. So I'm excited to get into this topic. But first, let me give you all the official about Sarah. Sarah Boyd is the founder and CEO of The Formation, a community-based app that serves up real talk, real resources, and real tight-knit community for Black women navigating the realities of corporate America. We know about that, right? As a certified talent development leader, Sarah has worked with C-suite executives and senior leaders, coaching, mentoring, and building impactful programs to help both individuals and teams succeed. After working in enterprise, startup, and social impact spaces, Sarah launched the Formation community to fill the glaring resource gap she saw in each of these environments. Today, she lends her expertise to creating resources for strategic disruption. I love that. Actionable tools Black women can use to advocate for ourselves in the workplace and safeguard the investments we have made in our careers. So it's pretty obvious, y'all, if you're listening, why I wanted to talk to Sarah today, right? She's running a community much like we're running at Black Women Leading and knee deep in this work, supporting Black women and helping them navigate the workspace. And so I thought it's a perfect time as we think about the changing landscape of what is happening from technology to the economic landscape to politics, you name it. we have to be what we're calling future ready leaders, thinking about how we're going to take care of ourselves in the midst of all this change. And this topic that Sarah brings and has some expertise in is just so timely. So excited to jump into this. And Sarah and I met on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is good for something. But no, I love LinkedIn. I make a lot of money on LinkedIn too. So if you're listening and you are not on LinkedIn, you need to get into it, girl. What are you waiting for? But anywho, Sarah and I met on LinkedIn and happy that we connected and that she is here today. So let's jump into this. But Sarah, before we start talking about strategic self-advocacy, I always ask our guests, what does the phrase Black woman leading mean to you? And can you share just a little bit about your journey as a real Black woman leading?
I love this question. I am a longtime listener of the Black Woman Leading podcast, and so I always love hearing people's answers to it. And as I was really reflecting on what it means to be a Black woman leading, the word agency just kept coming to mind. Because whether you aspire to lead, whether you've found yourself currently in a leadership role, when I think of what it means to lead well, just the word agency just kept coming back to me over and over and over again. And I think that it comes back to me because of the choice behind that and the options and agency that I hope any Black woman leading feels that they have.
Yeah.
To me, that agency is everything, especially when you talk about everything that you introduced, the changing economic landscape, the changing political landscape, the social landscape, the technological landscape. And so agency and choice just always come to mind because I know from my own journey as a Black woman leading, sometimes you're in environments where you feel robbed of that choice. You feel robbed of agency. And when you're able to really take a step back, cut through the noise, look through what's going on, you tend to find that you do have a bit more agency than you might initially think, or that others lead you to believe that you don't have. And so that's how I would answer that question. I know that's a little bit less tangible sometimes than others, but I think it really leads to some of the stuff we're here to talk about today.
Yeah. And the choices, right? That we have options, right? We have options. Share a little bit, Sarah. I mentioned in your bio, but would love to hear from you a little bit about your journey to this place and starting the formation and all of that. Share a little bit of that with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my journey to the formation really came out of that same journey of agency. And, for background, I always like to help people understand that I'm someone who has, of course, worked in organizational development, done a lot of coaching, mentoring with individuals and with teams, and kind of the dissonance that I started experiencing in my career was feeling like here I am trying to answer this question of how do I help individuals and team members succeed? How do I design resources and programming and culture to make sure that people have the tools that they need to succeed? That's the question I was trying to answer as an employee, while at the same time as an employee encountering these scenarios and navigating these relationships and scenarios where I started to question whether or not it was going to be realistic for me to have a career, to sustain the level of success that I had found at that point in my career. So I started feeling like, where are the resources that help me reclaim that sense of agency? Yeah. Where are the tools and the coaches and the mentors that I can ally with to help me feel like I have choices and discover the choices that I have and how to step into those choices? And what I often found was the resources I was encountering were just really woefully ill-equipped to
so
to
gracious
woefully inadequate. And so as a talent development professional, as someone who's interfaced with human resources teams and legal teams and kind of navigated my own experiences and who's worked in tech, I found that I had a choice to make. There was a level of work, a type of work that was really calling to me. Mm. And I decided to step into that choice to exercise my own agency and decided to put my talents and expertise and experiences to work. And that work, of course, became the formation.
I love it. I love it. Doing great work out in the world, but let's jump into this topic. And I want to level set a little bit. We're talking about strategic self-advocacy. Can you give a little bit about what that means to you? And is it different from just speaking up or asking for what you want? What language would you give for strategic self-advocacy?
Yeah, to me, strategic self-advocacy is very, very different than just speaking up or fighting for what you believe in. I always put the strategic before the self-advocacy piece, because what that strategic piece alludes to is the fact that you really have to have an understanding of the landscape. You really have to understand your history. You've got to tap into the collective wisdom that we hold and have as Black women, and that gives us the historical foresight to move in any moment. So to me, the strategic piece really comes from evaluating and analyzing the landscape that you are moving within, so that it informs how and when and the specific levers that you use to advocate. Speaking up, alludes to speaking and voice and loudness. Sometimes the most strategic thing you can do is to be silent. Sometimes you're so right, you don't have to say anything at all. And so to me, that's the difference there, is really having that understanding of the landscape that you're navigating. And that's where I have always found it really helpful to look at 4 different pieces of that landscape: what's happening politically, what's happening in the economy, what's happening with technology, and how all of that is shaping these different social expectations that dictate the landscape that we're operating in, and that we have to kind of find that choice and agency through.
So those kind of 4 pillars, if you will, are what you're taking stock of to decide what is going to be my plan of action going forward.
100%.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit more about that? Because I love that, having a bit of a framework, right, to think about this. If we're thinking about, for example, I think one of the pillars is economic, right? What are some things that I should be considering? I'm in an organization. Maybe I want to advocate for myself for promotion or to have some more responsibility. Tactically, what does it look like me considering some of these elements that you just laid out for us?
Yeah. So one example that I'll give on the economic front is this term known as occupational segregation. And that is a term that we can use to understand the economic labor market that we exist within. 90%, based on research done by the Maven Collaborative, 90% of roles are occupationally segregated, meaning that Black and brown folks, especially Black women, are often found to be put in these roles that are less secure, that are lower paying. And so what do we do with that knowledge when we're trying to advocate strategically for ourselves at work? Well, one of the things that I know I've thought through in my career is the types of roles that I allow my talents to be slated into. I've spoken with so many Black and brown women who, when we saw years ago, really this resurgence of DEI work, who they were in roles completely unrelated to organizational development, completely unrelated. They were engineers. They were, leading customer success teams. And they said, hey, Sarah, I'm being presented with this opportunity. I'm being told that this organization really needs me to lead these diversity initiatives. It's outside of my realm of expertise. I'm not sure whether I want to step into it. And while I know that DEI work is so incredibly important, if you understand your history and you understand the concept of occupational segregation, you can just kind of start asking yourself, do I want to step into that choice?
Yeah.
Do I want to remove myself from this area of engineering or, whatever other background it is, and allow myself to be placed into this role and potentially terminated when the organization's values change?
Yeah.
Or is that something that I want to step into because it fulfills me and it's aligned with who I am and the way that I want to show up in the world?
Yeah.
And so hopefully that kind of gives a good example, right? But when you start kind of understanding that economic landscape and you start understanding, some of the implications of that and what's happened historically, it can help inform how you move in the moment.
That's good. And what I'm hearing, the strategic piece is also thinking down the line, right? So what if I do take this path, what are the options for me beyond this particular stop on the journey, right? And how does that work with my overall vision and also what's happening in the landscape, right? Love
Absolutely.
that. I love that. So you run a coaching community as well, supporting Black women. What patterns are you noticing among, your high achievers in your community when it comes to advocating for themselves? What are you noticing is coming up around that?
You mentioned high achievers, which I'm so glad that you mentioned that because this is something I noticed specifically with, our A-type folks like myself who it's like came out the womb with a plan.
A clipboard, a plan and a clipboard.
Yes. A plan, a clipboard, a list of things to conquer.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm particularly noticing in this moment is no one's plans are going according to plan.
No one.
Everyone's having to recalibrate, and that can be frustrating to say the least, but life-shattering on the opposite side of that spectrum. So that's something I've definitely noticed and have been working with, especially the high achievers on, and that we see in research too, is that Black women are actually 3 times more likely to aspire to roles of power. And not just because we want power and money, but because we know that those roles are often what is going to allow us to pave the way for others.
Exactly.
And so, for high achievers who have that as a goal, their goal is to lead and their goal is to lead well. And they're living through this moment where they feel like the rug has just been completely pulled out of them. They're trying to game plan and get a plan put back in place while at the same time acknowledging that some of the tools that they've been told that they need to achieve that end goal, they're kind of becoming disillusioned with.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I'm glad that you really laid out those 4 key pillars earlier, because I do think there are some misconceptions around self-advocacy, and maybe you can help us to unpack that. For example, with Black Women Leading, a lot of our participants historically have been sponsored by their employers to participate in our programming. And we do understand it's a different landscape now with a lot of layoffs and downsizing. So employers are a little bit more tight-fisted with resources, right? So that's to be expected. But what we have noticed in this landscape of Black women being very cautious about asking for anything. So it's almost like, nope, I don't even want to put a spotlight over here because I don't want to be on the chopping block. And these are real, I don't want to make light of anything. These are real issues, but I think there are some misconceptions that self-advocacy is only something we can really push when we're in the space of abundance, right? And I love to hear your thoughts on that. I don't know if you're seeing that as well. People I'm not going to ask for the extra resource, the support, the advancement, because it just feels so uncertain. I don't want to rock the boat, that kind of thing. Are you seeing that? And what would you say some of the misconception is that's underneath that?
It is one of the most present topics.
Okay.
And it's for obvious reasons, it's one of the most present topics. People feel, I'm just going to be candid, betrayed, let down. Again, like the ground beneath them is just absolutely shifting, like they don't have power, like they don't have agency. And I think that that is one of the most understandable misconceptions, but the biggest misconception is that at this time where we're seeing companies reverse course on their values, where we're seeing, you know, massive volumes of women being pushed out of the workforce, where we're seeing return to office mandates, where we're seeing mandates to use things like AI under the guise of doing more with less than ever before, people feel like, gosh, I just need to toe the line because I could be next on the chopping block. But it's the absolute opposite, actually, that you want to do. And what we talk about so often is, I understand, and for good reason, that there are very real risks and repercussions that come with your visibility. But I think that the actual risk is in not speaking up and not speaking to the great work that you're doing, and not speaking up in ways that shine a light on the impact you're having, because what that actually stands to do is to safeguard you. And so I'm all about strategic self-advocacy in environments that feel and that, quite frankly, can be unsafe. Because what that strategic self-advocacy does is it helps you figure out ways to speak up and shine a light on what you're doing in ways that safeguard your paycheck.
Yeah. And it's a judgment issue too, right? Because there's a broad amount of things that we may be advocating for. And use your wisdom and your judgment, of course, based on what is the pulse inside of your organization. But what I'm hearing from you is this is not the time to just shrink and completely disappear from the conversation either.
Right.
Yeah. Given, okay, look, we're talking about this landscape and all of that. Let's go back to the AI, right? The rapid technology change, automation, evolving skill demands. I'm hearing a lot in quote unquote AI first organizations that are really almost mandating people to find out how they can use AI in every part of their workflow for efficiency and for being faster and all of that kind of stuff. Given this technological, I don't know if it's a shift, we're in the middle of a shift maybe, just how fastly it's moving, how quickly it's moving. How does that shift, or does it shift the way leaders should think about advocating for visibility, for value in this kind of AI first landscape that we're in?
Especially if you're in an organization where these AI mandates exist, to me, it makes that act of strategic self-advocacy 10 times more necessary. And one thing that I want to mention, just to kind of help people zoom out and get an understanding of why they're seeing these mandates, especially if you are in a company that is publicly held, where there is a board that is often associated with the funding that your organization is getting, especially if you're in a startup. What's happening and what we've actually seen in reporting is that CEOs are being given mandates by their boards. Everyone reports to somebody.
Yes.
And so these CEOs are receiving mandates from their board that say, hey, we've sourced funds, or your next round of funds is coming from investors who are really specifically interested in AI, because it's this booming area that we want to invest in. And so if you don't figure out a way to invest in AI, to get the organization to adopt AI, to get the organization to do something cool and fun and sexy and sleek with AI, you're going to be out of a job.
Wow. And
so that's where we start seeing CEOs start passing down these mandates. I kind of like to refer to it as trickle down uncertainty, where we see them passing on these mandates and saying, you need to default to AI. You need to figure out what to do with this. And where we start seeing this pressure on the individuals who are actually having to carry that out, who are sometimes saying, it doesn't work like that. I know that you want me to use AI in this area, but it actually takes me longer. It actually slows things down. It actually creates less efficiencies, or it actually annoys our customers because the output is not that good. And
Right,
now we're
right.
losing money. And so when it comes to strategic self-advocacy, especially in this shifting technological landscape, it's more important than ever for people to be quantifying the impact of their work, quantifying the successes you're having, quantifying the amount of time that you're putting into getting those successes.
Yes.
So that when you're going to your leadership and you're having conversations about the impact of AI, where it's helping, because it can be helpful, but also where it's hurting, you have the data to back it up and you're speaking in the terms that, quite frankly, matter the most to a lot of leaders, where you're saying, is this helping revenue or is this harming revenue?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the strategic part, right? In this landscape, how is this particular request coming to bear on the day-to-day work, and you being in the knee deep on the front row of it, being able to have the language to bring back that insight is a wonderful visibility opportunity for sure. Yeah.
Yes.
I love it. So I want to dial back a little bit. We've been talking about the kind of the landscape that we're operating in now, why it's more important than ever, right, for Black women to be utilizing some of these strategic self-advocacy skills. But I want to acknowledge some of the constraints or the challenges around this too, right? And there's a trauma component for a lot of people. For many Black women, pushing up against systems hasn't always felt safe. And you mentioned it, we want to get to the top. We have a desire to grow, but then sometimes we're the only one up there, right, on our level. Or we experience that in our Black woman leading community. Many of our leaders at the senior level and above are the only Black woman or the only woman or the only woman of color on that level, right? And having to face some things, being only, right? So, and thinking about that, how have you seen in the coaching work that you're doing that type of trauma or those experiences, even if some people wouldn't say maybe it isn't trauma for them, but that type of resistance, I will say, how do you see that show up? How does that show its face in self-advocacy and how people are able to navigate it?
How does the trauma show up as people are engaging with the tools
Yes.
of strategic self-advocacy?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think that experiencing that trauma is what leads people to tools of strategic self-advocacy. At this point, we all probably realize how much of a research nerd I am, but there's a study I remember that came out in 2023 by the founder of Exhale, which is a wellness app specifically made for Black women. And this is prior to, the fallout of 2025, prior to events that happened in 2024. This is 2023. And what that study showed is that 1 in 4 Black women have been hospitalized or have required medical intervention because of stress. And when you ask us, well, where is this stress coming from? 66% of those surveyed said it's from me overexerting myself in the workplace.
Overfunctioning. Yeah.
Yep. And so that trauma is coming from this pressure that we sometimes put on ourselves, but that more often than not comes from these workplace cultures where we are the only, where there's provider pressure on us for being, a first generation corporate success story, first generation VP or director or manager, where we feel like if we slip up, we stand to lose everything.
Yes.
And you're having these interactions with people that are traumatizing. And so where I see that show up is people are feeling that. They're holding that in their body. They're holding that in their heart. I know you focus a lot on heart work, which I love for this reason. But people are holding that and they're recognizing that they need a different way.
Yeah.
And so something that's so important to me in the work that I do is making sure that the resources I put together are trauma informed, although that's not something that I typically advertise, but it's something that's very intentionally gone into the design of a lot of the resources that I do put together, because I recognize that sometimes people are fresh off
Yes,
of these
yes.
traumatizing experiences.
Yeah, so good. And I love that reframe that the trauma is the activator of the strategic self-advocacy skills often. So let's go into some of the strategies. I know there are strategies you coach women through to help strengthen that self-advocacy muscle. Can you share maybe one or two of those strategies and how people might utilize those?
Yeah, since we were talking about, AI and, just kind of the economic landscape where a lot of organizations and businesses are trying to do more with less. One of the topics that has come up a lot is protecting our boundaries and protecting our human capacity
Yes.
in environments that, historically we've always kind of been treated like machines, but even more so now.
Yeah.
And so I always kind of cringe at the call to protect our peace in these environments, because I always have found that when our capacity and boundaries are protected, then that's where we are able to reclaim our peace.
I
Telling me to
see.
protect my peace assumes that I have any left.
Yeah. So you're like, the piece is gone. The piece has left the building, honey. Right.
Yes, yes. And so one of my favorite strategies, one of my favorite tools to kind of coach people through, when they're kind of feeling that trauma, when they're feeling that gut response and that friction and that disillusionment, is to identify what boundaries are not being protected and to specifically put language to that.
Yeah.
And so we do a boundary audit where we kind of start with our ideal state first. We kind of work backwards and we kind of say, okay, cool. Ideally, what do we want the workflows and the cadences of our day to look like? This isn't, a magical fairyland where we don't work and where, we've got someone fanning us with a leaf by a pool with a
Feeding us
margarita
great,
in our
right?
hand. But it's kind of realistically looking at three categories, right? Like, what commitments would I love to be able to hold for myself? What passions and joys and things that help me feel aligned and energized would I love to be able to incorporate into perhaps not every single day, but at least on a weekly basis?
Yeah.
Then what commitments do I also have to others, whether it's as a caregiver, a partner, a spouse, a mother, an employee?
Yeah.
Like, if you have to kind of map out the commitments that you have to others that you would like to coexist with commitments you want to hold to yourself,
Yeah.
what are those? And so by kind of looking at those areas and charting them out actually on a schedule, what it forces people to do is to start saying, okay, cool. Well, I'm actually struggling to get a human level of sleep because I have people in my life, personal or professional, who I'm overcommitted to, who they overcommit me. And so that audit is one of my favorite ways to kind of start putting language to what boundaries are being overstepped, overridden. And then my favorite thing to do is to reframe those oversteps as what people are and are not entitled to. Are people entitled to your exhaustion, Laura? Are people
Ooh.
entitled to your family time? Are people entitled to your weekend? Are people entitled to your sleep?
Yeah.
To your ability to stop in the middle of the day and nourish your body with food? And if the answer is no, well, we got to do something about that.
Yeah. The language, we really push that in Black Woman Leading too, like putting language to things. Cause baby, when you have the name for things, like when you just said, are people entitled to your exhaustion? Like when you really sit with that, who's saying yes to that? Nobody is saying yes to that, but our behaviors and the way we're engaging and allowing people to engage with us is saying yes to that, right? And so I love the clarity of the language reframe and that whole boundaries audit exercise you just kind of walked us through is a great example of the heart work and the head work, right? Taking that moment to really tap in, but then to say, what does this look like on the calendar? And what is the language that I'm going to put to this? That's the tactical piece of it. I love that. And that, when you think about that, and I'm so happy you shared that, because, sometimes we hear these terms, self-advocacy, strategic self-advocacy, and it lives in the in the clouds for people, not the cloud, but the clouds for people until they see it in this real kind of tangible way that you just illustrated here. That's really good stuff. Really
Can
good
I say
stuff.
one more thing too?
Sure,
Because for
yeah.
anyone listening who's like, okay, yeah, that language is great, but I know that people aren't entitled to that. However, I'm terrified. I'm not going to my boss and saying, you're not entitled to my exhaustion.
Exactly.
And so the next piece of that we work through is something that's actually rooted in software, something that very much aligns with project management principles. And I help people build what I call a capacity tracker, because that capacity tracker is your boundary backup. And so what we start doing is we start building this visual tool that you can use in the workplace, that you can take into your conversations with your team members, with your leaders, and say, this is the work that I'm engaged in. This is the strategic priorities for the organization, for the department that it maps out to.
Yeah.
And so when you come to me and you ask me, what more can I do? How much quicker can I turn that thing around? That visual exists to help you say, okay, cool. Well, this is everything that's on my plate right now. And so if you're telling me that we need this deliverable faster, well, here's the other deliverables I'm working through. And so that one's either going to need to be delayed. These are my 40s. That one's going to need to be delayed. We need to find someone else to delegate this one to. This is going to have to be done differently than we previously discussed and agreed on. Or this is just going to have to be dropped. It's no longer a priority, because if everything is a priority, nothing is. And I'm not a machine.
Exactly. Yeah. And having that type of capacity tracker allows you to say very confidently, I'd love to help. What would you like me to deprioritize? Instead of taking it on, but not having visibility of where you really are, and then over functioning and burning out and all of the things that we hear. Oh, I love it. So this gives us some insight on how we are managing this, but let's shift to the team level, because I really love this point you highlighted when we spoke earlier. Can you share a little bit about how strategic self-advocacy translates to advocating for the team? Because many people that's listening here are leaders of other people. So talk a little bit about how, if we take this to the team level, or you acting on behalf of the team, what does that look like? What does that sound like?
Yeah, that team level is so important for us as leaders, right? Because at the same time, we as individuals want resources to protect our own capacity and boundaries. We as leaders are responsible for protecting the capacity and boundaries of our team.
Yeah.
That is leading well. That is a skill and a level of leadership that I think a lot of us have had personal experiences not operating under when it comes to our leaders. And so it is so important to take those same concepts and apply them to the team level. And if you're looking at something like a capacity tracker, right, saying, okay, let's convert that not just to here's what I'm working on, here's what my team is working on. Here's, based on the staffing, based on the budget allocation that I have, here's what we're able to do. And here's now what we might have to deprioritize, what we might have to do differently, or what we might just have to drop. And we can, gain consensus, and we can come to an agreement on what those items are that have to be dropped. But what I'm not going to do as a leader is I'm not going to treat my team like machines and overcommit and overextend our capacity as a team, because then we're going to see turnover. Then we're going to see that we're opening ourselves up as an organization to liability. We're going to see all of these things that we don't want. And so those same tools of strategic self-advocacy apply, and especially that idea of evaluating the landscape of your organization so that you know what those conversations need to look like with different leaders that you report to as a leader to secure those resources and protect your team's human capacity as well.
Yeah, and it's so important that those two are married, right? That individual strategic self-advocacy for yourself and then for the team. Because what I often see sometimes is leaders, Black women in particular, being very on point with the strategic self-advocacy for the team to the detriment of themselves. So it's almost like, well, they asked us to do this, but my team is so busy. I don't want to. So then I'll do it or I'll find a way. And so you are providing that air cover for the team, but you're not doing the piece for yourself. So the team is straight. They're going home and having the evening and the weekend. And you are, filling in the gaps, trying to cover, ambitiously and with good intentions for the team, but not doing that same exercise for yourself. So it has to be a hand in hand kind of situation there.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a podcast episode I think of all of the time. It's Michelle Obama's podcast, actually. And I remember when she had Taraji P. Henson on as a guest, and Taraji was talking about how as Black women, we're so used to being shock absorbers. And that has just always stuck in my head and came to mind as you were talking, Laura, because that's that shock absorber behavior.
Yep. Man, that is a visual for you when you think about a shock absorber. I'm gonna have to use that. I'm gonna credit it though. I'm gonna give Taraji her props. So This is good. This is so good. I love this conversation. I think it's so timely. I do want to transition in a moment to a couple of our core season questions, but just want to ask you, Sarah, any other points on this that you think is really important to raise up on the strategic self-advocacy before we shift to the core questions?
I think the point I would want to underscore, Laura, especially given the times and the landscape that I know so many Black females and femmes are navigating, is to not absorb those shocks, to not internalize what it is that you're encountering in the workplace, to not internalize that fear. Something I often find myself saying in one-on-one conversations to people is, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. Nobody is immune. There are so many Black women who have spent their careers climbing the ladder, bending over backwards to get the role, get the car, get the swanky apartment, to get all of these things. And then they're living through a moment where they've been economically sidelined, where they've been pushed out of the workplace, where they're having a hard time finding that next role. And so if there's a single thing that I want to just make sure to underscore in this moment, it's to not internalize that as having anything to do with you. When we talk about strategic self-advocacy and why it's needed, it's because, yes, over 600,000 Black women have been pushed out of the workforce in the past year. An untold number of Black women have been pushed out of the workforce since the workforce has existed. And you should not ever internalize the conditions that allow for that to happen, ever. It does not signify anything about you, your credibility, your value as a person or as a professional. It signifies everything about the environment of inequity that we're working within.
Yeah. Oh, that's powerful. And thank you for really raising that up. Earlier on in the season, I think it was like the third episode or something of the season, we had a episode with Dr. Chinasa Elaway and Dr. Karma Hill, two of our Black women leading coaches, talking about the grief that comes with layoffs and the deeply internalized experience that some people have. Especially we see it with people who have really been at organizations for a significant amount of time, really contributing, backbone kind of coworker. And it's almost a betrayal, right, that they experience. And so I'm glad that you raised that up, because we could say, oh, it's just a job, but people bring their essence, their everything to these jobs and then end up feeling betrayed. So it's important that we do create some internal boundaries for ourselves in that way too. Good stuff. Oh, this is good. I could talk about this all day with you. But it's perfect. This topic is perfect for our season 8 theme of leaning into joy, because what I'm hearing in the refrain that's really lingering with me as you've been talking and sharing is that strategic self-advocacy is a way to create space for ourselves, right? To have the type of professional experience we want to have the type of personal experience we want to have, but it creates space for joy, for creating more joy in our lives. So I think of all of our guests as possibility models, right? For our listeners. And I love to ask you, Sarah, as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as a person that's out here moving and shaking, what does leading with joy look like for you in this season of your career?
Also love this question. And I've been thinking about it a lot because I talk a lot about resilience,
Yeah.
but also joyful resilience. And to me, our livelihoods are meant to power our lives, not the other way around. And so, what leading with joy looks for me like right now is leading with the things that bring me joy in life. It has been the most meaningful chapter of my career to be someone who gets to advocate for and with Black females and femmes.
Yeah.
It's also been an incredibly meaningful chapter of my career because I think in the past, 7-ish years, and certainly the past 3 years since becoming a mother, I have just recognized that I have a life to live.
Yes.
And I am not going to allow anyone to disrupt my ability to just enjoy my life. And so what that looks like for me is I do a lot of play and a lot of movement. I'm with my 3-year-old out at the zoo, out at the kids museum, doing little crafts, running around in the backyard with bubbles, building all manner of things with Legos. And to me, that's such a joy, not just because the activities themselves are joyful, but because it reaffirms for me something that's so important, which is that I'm just taking time to live and to enjoy my life. And that brings me immeasurable, invaluable amounts of joy.
I love that. Has this definition of joy shifted over time with your evolution, with your growth, with becoming a mom? Like, how have you seen that definition change for you?
Surrender, I think, would definitely be in my evolved definition of joy. I think as someone who's incredibly ambitious, as someone who came out the womb, like we were talking about with like a plan and a checklist, I think so much of my life revolved around control. And that certain things had to be ticked off and under my control for me to experience joy. Now I'm finding joy in these moments of surrender where I'm, like pleasantly held hostage by my toddler playing with Play-Doh and just finding joy in that moment and going, well, isn't it so wonderful that I get to be here, in my home with my son, making snakes with Play-Doh or whatever it is. And so just there's so much surrender that I've had to just freely give myself to, and just enjoying that ride and really enjoying that moment, even if it's not perfectly under my control or the ideal state that I would like for it to be.
I love that. What a blessing. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your insights today. I've really enjoyed this conversation with you. Where can people connect with you? And if they want to work with you, you got things going on, share a little bit about that for our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So if people are curious to learn more about the formation, they can, of course, go to weareyourformation.com. That's the formation's website. They can, explore kind of what we're up to and the different things that I offer there, including my coaching program, which is called Disrupt. It's all about disrupting the ways we've been expected to work so that we can reclaim that joyful life that we want to live. People are also surprised, I think, to see this and experience this with me, but I'm very active on LinkedIn. So it's so funny that you're like, yeah, we connected on LinkedIn, because I am on LinkedIn. I respond to messages on
Yeah.
LinkedIn. I enjoy the community I found on LinkedIn. So if anyone wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, I am a real human behind that profile, and I do respond to messages.
Yeah. Awesome. And we'll put all those links in the show notes as well. Well, thank you all for being with us today and listening. I hope that you got some insights, a spark, something that you can take back and add to your life, add to your leadership practice. If this was helpful for you, if it was insightful for you, share it with your networks, your friends, your colleagues, your family, and help to amplify this work we're doing to really strengthen Black women in their leadership, in their lives. We are on all major podcast streaming platforms. You can also watch us on the Black Woman Leading YouTube channel and listen to us on the Black Woman Leading website at blackwomanleading.com. You can also find out about all of our programs and events there on the website. If you want to connect with us on socials, we're at Black Woman Leading, and woman is singular, on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And then if you want to connect with me personally, I'm Laura E. Knights, very active on LinkedIn. You could also find me on Instagram. And then finally, if you want to learn about the work we do inside of organizations to help create more effective leaders and high-performing teams, check out our corporate site at knightsconsultinggroup.com. We love to connect with you in any of these ways. And until next time, be well.